we can discuss that a little bit more in particular. Feel free to mention anything. I'll give you 10 more seconds.
Hi, Sam. This is Claudia here. I'm completely new to VR and AR. So I guess I'm just looking for starting points when looking at like installation ideas for digital artworks, maybe in like augmented reality, and ways to make that interactive. I'm really interested in kind of that idea of like having an installation, kind of like an exhibition, but having it be interactive by viewers who are, you know, viewing it, and they are part of that installation. So I don't know if you have like any examples or like particular installs that were like really, really good that you could recommend. I'm trying to like really step in and just take it as much as I can, because again, I'm like so new to this, so I don't even know where to start.
Right. Okay, that's a great question. And it's the one that comes up pretty often. So first thing is, let's talk about how you can publish in AR right now. So it's tricky. You're either going to need a $3,000 headset like the Magic Leap 2, which hasn't come out yet, but should be coming out anytime. So, you know, if you're rich, which you're likely not, I mean, most artists aren't. If you're rich, you can really be on the cutting edge and buy those headsets that won't really be good in a year or two, etc. Now, the thing is, too, most of these headsets are mobile, meaning you have the kind of power of, well, actually, the Magic Leap has like a puck, external puck, so it has more power. So let's say, like, you know, you have the power of a cell phone or a powerful cell phone. So it's really more for the cutting edge companies. It's definitely not aimed at consumers. And then it's very tricky to show that in a museum or a gallery, because most galleries or museums won't have the equipment. They won't know how it works. The logistics are pretty tricky as well. You don't just leave a $3,000 headset on a table and be like, okay, figure it out. You kind of need to have somebody assisting the visitors, etc. And in terms of collectors, well, it's just not really there, right? Nobody has a $3,000 headset at home that won't be good in a year or two. The other way of showing AR art is through cell phones. So that's a lot more accessible. And one of the ways I recommend to a lot of people is actually just make an NFT out of it. Because if you make an NFT out of it, all of a sudden you can see it on your cell phone. One good example I had with my friend lately is he's doing research on NFTs, and many years back we had worked on some 3D VR kind of gallery stuff, kind of meme gallery. So anyways, I was like, why don't you make an NFT out of a 3D world that is a one-to-one scale, and that 3D world is an exhibit. So then your teacher can open it on their cell phone and walk around the exhibit in a one-to-one scale. And it was very successful, and I think that's a really good entry point into it. I would say generally, though, AR is not really there, you know, unless you follow the route of just making an NFT. Well, you're either going to need to be a programmer, or you're going to need a team. Like right now, I'm working with Mural Festival, which is a graffiti festival in Montreal. And it's like there's a whole development team making sure that the experience is going well. And you can't really expect to have some reaction to your art without being a developer or having a development team. So we're talking about like, you know, $30,000, $50,000 budgets, etc. So my best advice really is to do AR art instead, if you can. It's a lot more accessible. And the thing is, when AR art is ready, you'll be 80% of the way there, because like whatever you do in VR is definitely not lost. It's basically the building, like if you understand VR, you're going to understand AR. It's even closer than, let's say, being good at photography means that you're going to be good at movies. It just means that, okay, whatever you're doing in VR, now you have to consider the real world, you know, so is the person going to watch this on the train? Is the person going to watch this at home? Is the person going to watch this in the same space in a gallery, etc.? And for example, I do curation at Arsenault Gallery a lot and Elephant Gallery. And what we do is I've made a 3D plan of the room, and we give that plan to the people, to the artists. And very often, some of the most successful projects is the artist will recreate that room in VR in a kind of fantastical way. And it's really good. Like a lot of our visitors are new to VR, and so they don't feel comfortable. And so they're always afraid of crashing into something. But when you say like, hey, the walls in VR are the walls in real life, just don't run into the wall and you'll be fine. It's very comforting. And it's, we do a very rough alignment. You just go in the middle of the room and you align the room. But, that is almost pre-AR. It's like you're dealing with the real world, with the real architecture, and you're recreating it in VR. So once you're in AR, that exact concept is going to come into place, into basically garnishing reality in a sense. Does that make sense? Is there any direction you want me to dive into in that sense, or?
Yeah, that was really good. Thank you. It actually made me think of probably the first like AR kind of exhibit I ever visited at a museum here in Canada, where it was like a natural history museum. So they had like a dinosaur, like a permanent dinosaur exhibit, but they were having like one particular exhibition where, you could go in with iPads the museum either provided you with, or like install an app on your own phone. And then with AR, these dinosaurs would come to life around you. And I thought that was like a really great way to also engage like the kids. So ever since then, I've just been like thinking about like different ways to do that, like be interactive and like incorporate AR into like exhibitions that are already there,
Right. So one thing we're doing with Mural Festival, which, like I said, is I think is the 10th-year anniversary this year. So it's a graffiti festival, and they commission murals all around Montreal. It's one of the reasons Montreal is so beautiful. So one of the things, we were like, okay, we're doing AR art. So what's the traditional thing people are going to think about? Oh, you take the mural and you add something floating in front of it. So instead of going in that direction, what I really pushed for is more of what's the future of urban art. It shouldn't be just mural plus, And so the direction we took instead is really taking parks and garnishing them a little bit like a zoo with art. So instead of the vertical world being augmented, it's like more the horizontal world where you can walk through. And I think like taking a park and putting 5 sculptures in it. Now this does kind of need a development team at the moment, where you need to say, okay, this location is this piece of art, and you're going to need to have a screen to kind of jump into it, etc. But this idea of placing AR art in the world more as like an urban exploration aspect is very interesting, and also like it grows really well, right? It grows into what is urban art like when the art starts to interact more with the architecture or the urban landscape or the trees even. And then beyond that, this, I don't know how you want to call it, like this Godzilla type art where, for example, you see a creature on Mont Royal on like the mountain, right? Or like you see a creature walking through Central Park, like a giant, and everybody can see that creature. Or there was a really nice kind of parade of these giant marionettes. It was super dramatic. They're from France, but they flew them to Montreal. And there are these giant marionettes of like 3 to 5 stories tall. And they walk through the city, and it's just like the kids go absolutely insane, right? They're like, oh my God, there's a giant little girl like walking through the city. And that concept is just so much easier in VR, right? You can literally have, not Donkey Kong, but like King Kong, like climbing around buildings, and then it's like, okay, follow the creature. Where is it going to be today? What is it doing? And this kind of like shared mass hallucination of, oh, it's there right now. It's doing that. It's taking a nap, next to the tower or something, or like there's a snake floating around the building or something like that. So a lot of it is ideation for the future, and just trying to figure out like where's this going to go? How's this going to change art history? And obviously it's very freeing, right? It's just we're still waiting for a lot of the technology to happen, or there's this concept of the AR cloud. And the AR cloud is kind of one of the biggest problems in AR. So when I say AR cloud, it means I go on this street corner and I put my piece of AR here, and everybody can come in and see that on that street corner, the piece of AR is there. It's a shared hallucination. It's a shared experience in that sense. So that's tricky, but we know it's coming. We know Google's working on it. We know Niantic is working on it. It's a big competition as to who's going to get there first. and I'm sure Microsoft is working on it in that sense as well. So you can kind of prepare for the future in that sense with your ideas while still using what's available to you. But yeah, I feel like most people don't know that when you make a 3D NFT, it's available in AR. It will not be located in a particular place. You're going to be able to place it anywhere. But that's still very powerful. And especially I feel one-to-one experiences or architectural experiences, or like in that case of what I suggested to my friend, making like a little art exhibition, like literally building a gallery one-to-one, and then people can walk through that. But I think the architectural aspect as well is going to be very good. And it's like you have to think about it. Right now we're using our phones. It's not super immersive, but very quickly, in 2 to 3 years or faster if you're rich, you're going to have glasses, and you're just going to be in the space. So it's going to be immersive. It's going to be emotionally connected. It's just a matter of waiting, right? It's kind of like VR in 2015. It's like, well, we know it's there. It's not very comfortable, but if you build for what you know is coming, then you're going to be ready. And I suggest don't wait for the technology to be there, because everybody's going to be doing it at that point once it's easy to do. And if you can start thinking about it 2, 3, 5 years before it's ready, then your ideas will be that much more interesting and avant-garde. Once the technology is there, you'll be like, okay, here's all these ideas. Everybody's going to be like, oh my God. And VR and AR is very much like that, right? Like you don't take a video game that's for the screen and put it in VR and it works. It actually usually is a completely terrible idea. You need these new sets of ideas. For example, Beat Saber. Beat Saber wouldn't work on a screen. Beat Saber is kind of like this game where you have these lightsabers and you're chopping through. It's a little bit like DDR, the dancing game, but instead you're like chopping through these notes on the screen. And it wouldn't make sense outside of VR. And I think it's the most popular game in VR right now. So you have to do this kind of paradigm shift, and it's hard to do without just consuming VR and consuming AR and thinking about it and doing the kind of philosophy behind it. And with that being said, consume as much VR and AR as possible. Like go find the art games. Like if you have a VR headset on a desktop, like go play, what is it? Paper Animals or something. Let me just see here. Like there's a roster of really good VR games that are going to inspire you to think differently. And much like anything in VR, that usually translates really well to AR. So let me just look at, so Museum of Other Realities is definitely something you should visit. And we're very likely going to do some NFTs from Hikitnunk at some point in there. Let me just look through here. Loon from, what's his name? Cabibbo, Cabbibo. Like he's a really good avant-garde VR developer. And there's 2 ones. Battlescar is really good. It's like, it really feels like a collage, but in VR. And so you can think of like these older artworks from the 70s and the 60s, or, even Dada art or like punk art. But like, it's really interesting to see these 2D styles come into VR. So I really recommend Battlescar. It's called Battlescar, like Girls Invented Punk or something. And that's all I can think of right now. But yeah, definitely consume as much VR art. Oh, Paper Beast, I think the other one is called. Yeah, Paper Beast. That is one of my absolute favorite. If you can, I recommend it to anybody. If you have a VR desktop, like Paper Beast is just such a masterpiece. It's really like being in a kind of abstract story, abstract painting with these beautiful animals and the music. It's just very kind of spiritual in a sense. So Paper Beast is one of my favorite recommended, and it can get you to think about, what VR art should be and how that translates into AR art. So I'm not sure if there's any other comments or directions you'd like me to take at this point. Okay. So maybe what I'll do is I will show you I was just painting last night, and I was like, oh, maybe they'd like to see some work in progress. One second. Okay. Oh. Just gonna put on my VR headset for a second. You can see my screen, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is my latest piece. So it's an architecture building. You can kind of see it. What I did is I modeled it from the exterior, and then I started carving it in. And so this is the inside. So I'm just slowly carving by hand, like adding a bunch of details to this macro structure. And then what I'll be doing is doing some baked lighting. So the light will be coming in through all of these holes and hitting all of these details. And you can see there's a lot of holes that will create a bunch of different indirect light. And the goal is really like, I'm pretty big on solar lighting. And so I want to see the light coming into this from many, many different angles. So this is probably going to take another 6 months to finish all the detailing, but it can kind of give you an idea like of where I'm going at in terms of my explorations and what I like to do in terms of, I call it VR architecture, but it's definitely not like traditional architecture in that sense. Okay. Feel free once again if you have any points of interest. Like this is just kind of a pretty standard presentation on VR and AR. So if you have any point of interest, feel free to diverge the conversation, etc.
We have Santiago on the chat that is asking for the link of the game you mentioned.
Link of the game?
Yes. I don't know.
I can maybe put a little Twitter post after, but yeah, there's
Okay.
I'll make a list.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay. So, as you know, I'm a VR nerd. This is like really old art from like 2010. So I used to be more of a 2D painter. Then went big into architectural technology. Then did some lighting design in architecture. Then did 4 years of architectural design in university, including some really weird projects like a moving dance floor. Yeah, this was the kind of kit, this was like, okay, VR is kind of ready. So starting at that point, I bought this headset, and then within a week, I had my 3D model in VR and didn't stop putting all my stuff in VR. Before there were controllers, I basically worked with this guy. Oops. I worked with this guy to Anyways, I worked with this guy who had this graffiti game, and I was like, yo, can you make it that I can import and export 3D models? So I would import my architectural model, design over them with my hands because there was no controllers at the time, and then export that back into the software and basically design buildings in 3D. So that was like way back in 2016, I think. Then I did a hackathon. When I moved to New York, I did a hackathon of like this platform to host 3D objects, art objects, and then put them in Altspace VR at the time. So basically to create VR galleries online. And had a little interface. Then I worked for a startup in VR and architecture. So this is like some really early tests of like, okay, we're putting some 3D art into VR, or like all of the swirls in the top. Those were like my really, really early VR art. So I think I'll just go over this real quick. Like, I absolutely hate when people call 360 images VR. It's not VR, it's immersive video, it's immersive environments. So this is a great example. So 360, you're not going to be able to move. Yes, it's immersive because you can turn all around, but you can't like bend down, you can't explore, you're just stuck to this location. And most importantly, whatever kind of research or work that you do in 360 is not going to port to augmented reality because it's not 3D. It's just a big sphere of images. Whereas if you do something in VR, you can bring it to AR after, and it's part of that evolution. It's part of that knowledge transfer in a sense. Okay, so here's the thing that's like really revolutionary about VR. So, we've been experiencing the world through a frame. Like, let's say the Mona Lisa, right? There's this entire world, there's these mountains, there's this lady, there's this smile, and we're just getting a little snapshot from a single angle of it. So what I really love about VR is that you're making the frame explode and you're going into that world. And it's very important because you don't really get that in the history of art, right? The closest you get is what's in green. So you get theater, you get reality, like war, love, and drama. You get sculptures to a certain degree, kinetic art, autonomous art a little bit, but everything else is just images. And what's been interesting with new media, like CGI or nowadays, everybody does work in 3D on the computers. Not everybody, but a lot of people do work in the computer. But you're still getting that freaking frame where you're only seeing a screenshot of it, and it's like, okay, with VR and AR, I can go inside of all of this art I'm seeing on Instagram for years now, and I can be part of that environment, and it can come into my world. So it's a very important transition for the history of art, and it's just there's not too many people. Actually, now it's changing, especially with like Meta, etc. Like, there's been a huge excitement for Metaverse art with Facebook transitioning to Meta. So so we're exploding the frame. We're finally allowing you to go into these worlds and get out from these freaking screens. Right. So there's a lot of like discomfort, obviously, that can happen. So you have to be very wary of that, especially when I'm presenting at art galleries. It's like there's two markets, right? You can market to 2% of the people that have VR at home and that already know about VR, or you can market to more of a transformative market, which is the 99 to 98% of other people that don't have a $3,000 computer, that don't have a VR headset. So if you put something on Steam, you're going for that 1 to 2%, whereas you put something in a gallery, you're going for that 98%. So it's very important, I feel, to make experiences as comfortable as possible. What I try to do in the gallery is have experiences where people are not going to use controllers, where people are not going to be teleporting. As I mentioned before, I prefer experiences where the person just walks into the room, and that's why I give the room model to the artist so they can create a room that is going to fit the physical room. Any questions up to this point? Another thing is that you have a body in VR. Well, you do or you don't, right? And so the concept of having a body, like actually for most of the experiences in the gallery, there's just zero body. So that's one way of doing it. It's kind of hard to add a body to somebody. Like if there was an experience seated in a chair like this, it'd be pretty easy to model the legs. If you say, hey, come in the gallery, sit in this chair, the chair is aligned to the legs, it's good to go. But it's a little bit of a shock. Most people go in and probably their first reaction is like they want to touch it, and then they realize, oh, I don't have a hand. And then they look down and it's like, oh, I don't have a body. Or I had one experience where people were sitting on the floor and, they're looking at their legs and there's nothing basically. So it's something definitely to consider, identity in VR. And, one big problem we've had with the gaming world is that the gaming world often assumes that you're like a white male teenager. So obviously the art world is a lot more varied, and so should the gaming world. So there's identity can play a big part. Or I remember this one person, going into Facebook worlds, and he was like 300 pounds or something. And he's like, I don't have the option for a fat avatar. Like I don't feel comfortable because this isn't my body. I'm only seeing like skinny bodies that don't associate with my own identity, etc. Um, and with that too, like this comes up pretty often, or like in VR chat, you come in and you see there's this concept I called like digital drag. It's a lot easier to change your identity or your sexuality even in virtual reality or in digital worlds. So when you go into VR chat, it's almost like there's so many guys that are like little anime girls, and it's like it's definitely a phenomenon. Or I was just mentioning yesterday or the day before, it's like all of these people dress up as like sexy girls or girls, and it's like, I'm sure if you were to ask him like, would you put on makeup to go to the grocery store, 90% of those guys would be like, no, never, like I would never dare do that. Whereas in VR, it's not even like there's not even a second thought about it. It's just like, oh, I'll be like some sort of dragon or a pot of spaghetti or a girl, and I'll just change my identity however I feel like it. So there's a lot too of that question in the metaverse of like playing with identity, shifting identities, and that goes very much into augmented reality as well, right? Like last time we talked a lot about AR fashion, and I think like there's a lot of stuff that emerges, and it's probably the most interesting thing is emergence from these new mediums. So when we invented the internet, we didn't know that Facebook was going to be a thing that we would, if you ask somebody, would you be able to delete Facebook today? Like they'd probably like freak out. But before the internet, we didn't know that these new things were going to happen. We didn't know that Amazon was going to happen. So VR and AR are very much going to have these new phenomena that we can't really think about yet, like maybe VR pets or AR pets, or I think more of like AR auras or AR fashion, or morphology of the body and things like that. So the only way you're going to discover what those things are is by consuming it, by thinking about it, and through time, these new phenomenons will emerge. And like I said, they're pretty much the most exciting things. And there's a big thing too, like with VR art and with VR architecture, same thing with AR. We're going to consume those things, and those things are going to change us, and they're going to start affecting our reality. So you have a chance of taking part in that process. All right, so next topic is entering and exiting VR. It's a very, it can be shocking. Sometimes coming back from VR can be more shocking than going into VR. So make sure that if you're presenting in a gallery or you're presenting to people, that you really make sure that it's a smooth experience. Or one of the best transition I've seen is at the Phi Center, where you came into this room and the whole room was dark and there were like scribbles all over the room. And when you went into VR, it was the same environment. So that was really a nice transitioning from different realities. It's kind of like, think if you're in your living room and all of a sudden you're, at the top of the CN Tower or whatever, like at the top of a mountain, it's a little bit of or in a roller coaster, like it's a little bit of a shock. So the more you can prepare people mentally, assist them, like put the headset on for them, like comfort them, like, hey, is this your first time in VR? Like, don't worry, there's no abrupt movement. You're going to be comfortable, and like just easing them through is very important. And same thing when they take off the headset, like do it softly, talk to them. And there's kind of an art into entering and exiting VR, and it gets overlooked pretty often. Any questions so far?
We have a question on our chat again.
Mm-hmm.
So Dylan asks if is there a way to use the head, but not the head, so I can sculpt on the desktop screen? There is a kind
Use
of
the
concept.
hands, but not the head.
Exactly, yeah.
Uh,
Dylan, if you want to, yeah, I think it is on. So if you want to add something.
There isn't, as far as I know. It's a desire I've seen come up a couple of times. Probably through like some hackathon type of thing, some hacking type of, but there's no application really that lets you do that. The good news is that there's a lot more sculpting and I would say actually painting applications nowadays. There's Viridian, which is a developer I think it's a solo developer. So it's Viridian, like the color, and it's more like aimed at almost like oil painting or acrylic painting. It's very traditional in a sense, but obviously you don't have to buy the paint. There's also, I think it's called like just VR Paint or Painting VR, and that is that lets you do kind of graffiti, rollers, regular paint. I know Fora the Compasso uses it a lot, who's a very great Hikitnunk artist. But yeah, as far as just using your hands, I don't think it's really something that, without a VR headset, I don't think it's really something that is very much developed right now, if it's even available at all. Any other questions or?
Thanks, Sam. Sorry, I don't know if you could hear me before, so I typed you my message. But yeah, I appreciate that. So I've used Quill a little bit, and I actually work at an animation studio in the UK where we've done like quite a few things with Google Spotlight, and so I have sort of some experience like looking in VR. And I, as you mentioned before, I always feel totally disoriented when I come out of it, and I feel quite like spun out, honestly, and I'm often like tangled up in the wire. And what you said before about like having like a quiet space, like a kind of chill out room, I think is it's really interesting. And like I love it, but I don't like the experience of being in it, so but it's not quite there yet, you don't think, to just be able to do it on a desktop and use the gloves.
And so I would say with that, like, first off, make sure you have a really powerful computer so that you know that if you have a bad performance computer, you're going to get sick. It's just, that's the thing about it, right? So make sure you don't get any lag from your computer. So unfortunately, that's a little bit of a luxury. The other thing is, you're going to need to build VR legs. Not everybody can do it. There's some people that, just looking at a screen, they'll get sick. Those people are definitely just not really. They're more apt to use AR, for example. Like, here's the thing. Here's what makes you sick, right? You turn your head, and your computer's too slow to calculate that, and so the world follows a little bit later. And so what your brain tells you is you've been poisoned. You need to vomit. Basically, you've been poisoned or you're dying or something. So it's the same thing as seasickness. And it's basically a difference between what your ear's gravity system is telling you versus what your eyes are telling you. So make sure you definitely don't have that. And the only answer is to pump money into your system, unfortunately, or use low poly, like the what I just showed you of my art. That's very demanding on the computer, so I do need a good computer. But if you're doing something simple, it won't matter as much. Now the other thing is, like, I don't do sessions that are longer than 45 minutes. Everybody has their own tolerance, and I would say, like, the best thing is, as soon as you feel any kind of sick, stop, and maybe start it a day or two later, try again, and those lengths of time will just get longer and longer as you keep doing it. But definitely do not force yourself. If you get sick after 5 minutes, stop after 5 minutes. Don't try to do 20 minutes, because then you may feel sick for like a week or two. So just stop, and your brain will slowly start to adapt. Now, there are some things too with the eyes that kind of naturally make it a bit uncomfortable. Your eyes are always going to focus at 2.5 meters, even if the object is like at 500 meters or 1 meter. So that is, I think it's called like the convergence problem, and it should be solved eventually. Like, I think Facebook is probably going to need to come up with a pretty slightly expensive, higher end headset to do that. And that's going to really help with the comfort a lot, where, when you focus at 500 meters, your eyes focus at 500 meters, and then stuff that's closer by gets blurry. When you focus on something closer by, stuff further away gets blurry, etc., much like in reality. And there are other people say, like, if you eat ginger, or if you drink like even ginger ale and stuff, it'll help with this sickness, VR sickness. But my main thing is, as soon as you feel any kind of discomfort, just stop. You definitely don't need to power yourself through it, basically. And then the other will be good equipment and future VR headsets. And yeah, people think I'm spending like 8 hours in VR, but it's really like 45-minute sessions max. It can very easily be 20-minute sessions. It's just like I try to go as often as I can so that those kind of stack up, basically. But I would definitely not do like a full day of work in VR. Any other comments or questions so far? Okay, you can still see my screen, right?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. All right, so I've already kind of touched on this. You can paint in VR. This is Kingspray, so it's a VR graffiti app. You can also bring reality into VR, right? So that's very exciting. I've seen a couple of you folks already playing with photogrammetry. That's coming a lot more in the NFT world as well. One thing I'm surprised that's really missing from the NFT world right now is 3D photogrammetry portraits. And especially because you can do photogrammetry with your cell phone. I've seen a few artists do it. I mean, sometimes they do something pretty simple and like the piece is like 30 or 40 TES, so it's a bit unaffordable. But because it's so democratically easy to use, I'm surprised we haven't seen kind of an evolution of photography and portraiture in particular through 3D. I feel like that's kind of missing in this space. It's a little bit of a lost opportunity in that sense. This is an earlier project from 2018 where we were scanning people using a Kinect camera, and then we did an augmented reality show. So, earlier I kind of mentioned that most headsets, it's mobile devices, and so you're very limited. Whereas in this headset, this was one of the few headsets, the Meta AR headset from Metavision, which allowed you to plug into a computer. Unfortunately, that company went bankrupt because they were having too many parties and not making enough money. This is another really early art show we did where this was 2018 as well, like February or January 2018. And it was like, okay, I lent my computer to my friend, showed him how to do VR sculpting. Then he did all of those sculptures, one of which you can see in my background. And we did this kind of AR art show with the Meta AR headset, where it was kind of like a mix of physical and AR sculptures. So obviously, AR allows you to kind of bust through reality and just kind of like explode expectations. So definitely don't stick to creating what is already out there. Yeah, human reactions. So for a lot of people, it's very new, and there's some things that are going to shock people. So not having a body, having the body of somebody else. A big surprise for me was when I did my VR sculpture, one of the things that people liked the most was walking through it, because in reality, in a gallery, you can't walk through the sculpture. You can't have that experience of being inside of another physical object. A big thing too that's coming is maybe less in terms of art, but in terms of business or careers, is that we're going to have VR websites, or as we call it now, the metaverse.
Your typical basic broadband, even 5.
Hello? Okay. So yeah, we're going to have the metaverse. So that means, much like before the internet, nobody knew what the internet was going to mean for them. Now every single brand has a website. We're very like, if you look at the old Yahoo websites of the first year, or how Google used to look like, or how the first year's website used to look like, it was weird as heck. It was uncomfortable. Actually, here are some examples. Here we go. This is what Facebook looked like before. This is what YouTube looked like before. Amazon, right? It's a complete mess. So we are in that complete mess of the metaverse right now. And in 5-10 years, we're going to be like, oh my God, what the heck were we doing? And so it's really the time to figure out to build the future in a sense, and you can really be part of that. It's like if you try to be an innovator right now with websites, you're competing with millions of people. You're competing, like they're teaching this in university, right? They've been teaching this in colleges for years now. And so you're competing with the entire world. Whereas if you're trying to innovate in the metaverse and to say, hey, what should metaverse architecture look like? Well, there's not a lot of people doing it. And so it's really a good time to look at it, whether you're just building your own gallery, whether you're, you could, for example, reach out to a bookstore and be like, or a magazine and be like, what should it feel like to shop for a book in the metaverse? What should it feel like to go through a magazine as a spatial experience? What should it feel like to read a review as a spatial experience? So the way I try to explain the metaverse is just kind of like if the internet was a series of spaces, and all of that is up to be defined. Not to mention like how you navigate the metaverse. So for example, I think the architecture of teleporters is going to be very important. There's this one experience at the Phi Center that really touched me. It was kind of the most immersive experience I've ever had, where you went in and you were alone, and there was basically a bunch of actors using motion capture that would react to you. And they were literally in front of you, but like they would show up as this bunny, for example, and they were really there in front of you. At some point, in the VR, there would be like a thing to eat, and when you reached out to it, there was a real object that you could eat. Or I remember there was like the giant, not the snail, but like the slug or whatever from Alice, and he's like smoking, and then really you smell like the vape in the vape juice in the air, etc. So there's a lot of ways to really push that forward. There's also where, COVID obviously hurt these types of concepts, but we're seeing the resurgence of VR arcades where you build a very simple world and then you augment it basically. So that can pretty easily be used in for VR as well, or for art as well. And then there's non-Euclidean spaces, right? So what I mean by that is that these are spaces that couldn't exist, that you have to kind of program in a sense. So see, he'll go in one room and then all of a sudden like something changes that wouldn't be possible in reality, or like the gravity changing. So don't limit yourself to reality, and you can kind of start exploring those types of mathematically impossible worlds with VR. Now, a lot of what he's showing right now would probably make people completely sick. So it's just kind of like to show you an example. I'm not saying do this in VR, but like see what he just did with the corridor. That was like an example of you go into a room, you go around the pillar, and all of a sudden the door that you just came in through is going to disappear, etc. So do play with non-reality if you can. Now, this I already kind of hinted at. VR architecture, teleport or teleportation system, and it goes too with the idea of like testing out as many games as possible. So this is in the Museum of all of these examples are in the earlier versions of the Museum of Other Realities, and I'd say like buy as many VR games as you can, or through Steam you can always get a refund if you haven't played the game more than 2 hours, I think. And if you ask for a refund within a week, so if you can't afford it, buy some games and get them refunded. But like sometimes a VR game will be bad, but there was a really good teleportation system or a really good item system. Like you pull out a backpack and then there's like, it's all new and to be discovered. So the more sources you can kind of gather from, the more your tool bag is going to be rich. Another thing that's not really talked about too much is architecture for VR. So that means how should you facilitate all of these experiences? Where do you put the computer? Where do you put the wire? How do you have the headset floating there or accessible? Do you need somebody at each station? So obviously by creating VR art shows, it makes you think about that a little bit more, but don't don't underestimate the amount of innovation you can have in the hardware physical space as well. And yeah, it's a great time to question everything. So this is an example of like a floor I did. So obviously the floor is like completely exploded, and when you're walking onto it, you're definitely not walking on something solid. You're walking on something that is very much dematerialized. And so yeah, question the basics of reality is something you can do, whether that's identity, whether that's the physical world we're used to, whether that's just interacting with other living things. As I kind of mentioned before, whatever you do in VR is going to port very well into AR. So because AR is not ready yet, play with VR. All of that effort is not going to be wasted. If you do 5 years of VR work, you will be so ready when AR comes around. And yeah, we kind of talked about the metaverse and what it means. So really, the metaverse is this concept of VR and AR and reality and the internet kind of playing nice with each other. So you see your friends in real life, you go have a game in VR, and then you go in your living room and they're there in AR, and maybe you continue the game, and then you go on the internet and there's still that connection you can have. So it's still not quite there yet, and it is a sci-fi concept, right? So in the sci-fi world, it has its own rules, it's got its own currency, which we're kind of seeing with NFTs and crypto. It's got its own culture and politics, and I would even argue that it's almost like a separate country, or it has to do maybe like with it has its own independence in a way, right? Or it's like kind of silly when you have governments that want to tax crypto like 30%. It's like if you sell NFTs, you'll be taxed 30%. It's like, okay, well, this is another country. Like you've literally done nothing to help us. Like the only thing you have is that we have the internet and power, which you're not really exactly providing anyways. So I think in the future, yeah, it's almost like the metaverse can be seen as like a separate country, a separate living space. This I've already talked about a little bit. So mobile VR. So if you don't have a computer, this is really old, by the way. Definitely don't do anything on Google Cardboard. Everybody will hate you and they'll think that VR is terrible. I've already kind of mentioned my hatred of 360 videos. So don't do 360 videos if you want to go into AR. I feel like it's kind of a waste of time, and it's definitely not VR. It's not because you're seeing in a VR headset that it's VR. It's kind of like I could film a book, but it doesn't make it a movie. Yeah, don't underestimate screen-based AR. So you can have some pretty cool experiences through iPads or through your cell phone, and that will transmit very well into AR. I'm sorry, it's going to transmit very well when you put a headset. It'll just be even more easier and interactive, and what's the word I'm looking for? Immersive. Another quick note is Simply Gone Studio. So, a big thing with especially these mobile devices is you need to reduce the amount of triangles for it to work. And Simply Gone Studio is software that is used by, I think, like 95% of AAA games. And it used to be like $30,000 or $40,000 per year. Microsoft has bought it and made it free to use. So don't not use it. Like you can see here, I have a sculpture with 9 million triangles. And here I've reduced it to 250,000 triangles. And for all intents and purposes, it looks not the exact same, but it looks like 95% of the same. And I've chopped up most of the triangles. So if you don't know, when you're using a device like this, or that is considered a mobile device, all the power comes. It's not being powered by like a $3,000 computer. So that means you're going to have way less triangles that you can fit in. And so having a tool like this is extremely powerful, especially because now it's free. And the reason why it was acquired by Microsoft and made free is so that augmented reality art or experiences can be democratized so that it's not limited to only the people who can afford this really good software. So I think that's pretty much the end of my PowerPoint here. Stop sharing. And so, yeah, I'm not sure if there's any kind of like things that triggered for you, or if you still have any kind of questions or things that you'd like me to talk about a bit more than others.
Hey Sam, thank you for coming on today. That was great. Actually finished reading Ready Player One this week, so this feels very in theme, this presentation as well. I came 20 minutes late, so I'm sorry if you maybe already addressed it, but my partner is an architect and I'm an artist, and we've been kind of chatting of maybe designing a gallery, like a VR gallery together. What would you recommend where to get started with that? So he definitely has like the 3D skills and such. Yeah.
Well, is he more towards like traditional buildings, or is he going for like crazy organic buildings like I am?
So what we talked about in terms of design is that we would definitely want to push it further than what we've seen in gallery design so far, but definitely like more modern and straight line than organic.
So, and is he using like Revit? Is he using SketchUp, Rhino?
I think indeed he works like in Revit and AutoCAD, and then some other rendering engines too. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm a big Revit nerd, and it's what I do for my real job. So you just basically export the 3D model. What is there, right? Keep in mind the easiest workflow is Revit to 3ds Max. You may have some issues. I think the latest versions of Revit is not too bad. You're not going to lose too much of the materials, but the older version of Revit to 3ds Max, ironically, they're both software from the same company, but the materials weren't coming in very well. Know that Revit is pretty terrible for exporting circular extrusions, so you'll probably want to use a software like Simply Gone to fix that geometry, because it'll be very high triangles. But if you do some squarish, let me find you an example. If you do some squarish architecture, it'll be pretty low poly. It all comes to the polygon count. Yeah, I'll share my screen again. So this is a gallery I did in 2016, and I don't necessarily have a shot of the gallery from the exterior, but let me just do a quick sketch. So it's kind of, you can tell I'm using really good cutting edge tools. It's kind of like there's a tower, and then there's a corridor, and then it connects to another tower, like so. And it was very simple, and it was made in Revit, and you can see the tower and the other tower, and this is inside the tower, and this is inside the corridor. So it's very simple. There's some light openings, so you can get some nice light plays. But the whole thing, I think, was 420 triangles in total. So, you know, it's not really about the complexity here. It's more the lighting that's going to do the work, and the like kind of classical shapes and the openings in the walls that are going to do the work. This is another gallery I did in Revit. So actually, maybe I'll show you the. So this is kind of like my super long-term project. You can see it in this image. So I've got about 15 rooms. This is a gallery I did in like 2017. So I got like 15 rooms, and this is what I just showed you. Actually, sorry, go back. So this is this room here. is in this little box right there at the right. And what I'm doing is I'm slowly filling out these rooms with like a sculpture that takes a long time. And the goal is that in like 10, 15, 20 years, the entire gallery will be filled out with sculptures. And each room has like a solar, it's more about the solar lighting than the complexity of the space necessarily. So all of this was made in Revit. And then it's just about adding something that was sculpted by hand in it. The Museum of the Realities, you can check out my website on it. I talk about it a little bit. So for example, this is the VR sculpture I did. Actually, the tool I use, Medium, is terrible for making a flat floor. So I ended up making kind of a hybrid of, so see, this is the part I did in Revit, and this is the part I did in Medium, and then I just stacked them on top of each other. So obviously, for something that's more like Platonic, flat, geometric, I'm going to use Revit for those types of things, and the white is like self-illuminating surfaces in this case, are not holes. Whereas for the organic stuff, I would do that in Medium and then bring it in. Now, what happened is, you see this kind of imperfect hand sculpture. This is what they got. And what they did at the Museum of Other Realities is that they remodeled it all. So you can see here, this image is the same view as this. This kind of beautiful shape is this shape here that's a lot more organic in this case. So what really happened is there was a second designer that kind of came in and recreated the space, quote unquote, cleaner, quote unquote, more geometrically, more mathematically inclined. And so, you could have done it like this, but it's also nice to have somebody else go in with more of a mathematical mind where all the shapes are the same thickness, for example, etc. And this is kind of what you get at the end. And then we're just kind of going into like a bunch of different sketches of the ideation processes. So yeah, it's definitely possible to do some great architecture with just Revit. And then, like, for example, this is the complete opposite where it was made in Google Blocks. So obviously this would be impossible to do in Revit. It's very, very organic. It's all sculpted by hand except for the flat floor. And I think that's more interesting too. Like, I feel like creating VR art in VR is the best way to do it. If you can stay away from screen-based processes, I feel like when I'm creating this, I'm inhabiting it, not only from the standpoint of like a god in terms of scale, like a Godzilla view, but also I can just zoom in and experience it from a human point of view. Now, the thing is, you're not going to get that beautiful lighting while you're creating it. You have to kind of imagine that part of things, but that's okay. Does that answer your question a little?
Yeah, for sure. More than answers the question, and it's also nice to see the different projects, to see the differences.
Nice.
Thank
And
you so much.
the way okay, so here's the thing, right? It's hard to sell VR art. It doesn't exist. And so I've been having this problem since the beginning. There's not a lot of collectors. Most galleries don't know how to support it. Most museums don't know how to support it. So my latest aha moment has been basically saying, I'm going to give the VR experience for free, and I'm going to make some videos that I can sell as NFTs, because I don't want, for example, my VR experience to only be available to like 5 rich people. I want everybody to learn from and experience the art. So if you go on my website, which is, pretty, let me share my screen in a second. So my website's pretty amateur. It's like when I turned 35, I was like, oh, maybe I should have a website. And that was last year. And so I spent like 2 weeks on it. So sometimes it's a little bit cringe and unfinished. But so let me just go back to the front. I'm going to go digital architecture. Flame is my latest piece. And if you scroll here, there's a big download VR experience. So this is free. And, if you want to check out my Versum, I do have these kind of like solar. It's in my collaboration, but I do have these kind of solar animations from that piece. But anybody can come here and download this for free, and I really wish more people would, etc. And then these are the animated versions of the pieces, and I worked with frick, what's his name? Bellavita, Franco Bellavita. So he's a really good sound artist. So turn up if you're going to look at this, basically. And there's also, we did the sound for the piece in VR. So I'm really curious, if you're interested in VR architecture, definitely try that out. And I'm hoping, I didn't get much of a response for this, so it kind of slowed down my enthusiasm. But I'm hoping to eventually do the same with all of my other pieces, like this one, and potentially even this one, and all my future worlds from here. So I'm hoping to release it for free, and then have some NFTs that help pay or encourage the development of it, so that the dream would be that I could just do this full time, basically, and not die. So. But right now I have a full-time job, thankfully. And so, it's like there's a working Sam that's sponsoring the art Sam. But it'd be nice if it was just the art Sam that could like live on his own and do things before it's too late. So yeah, I'm very curious to see people's reaction to that VR piece. Any other comments, questions, or things you'd like me to discuss, or?
We have a couple of questions in our chat. They're quite long, so if you want to take a look at it, and then, yeah.
Okay, let me just open it up here. It's going to be in Residency 3rd cohort, or is it somewhere else?
No, there, exactly, yeah.
Okay.
The first one is from Santiago, and the second is from Evie.
Okay, so you talked about some stuff in Covered, but can you include some resources for Little? I have an Oculus Quest VR headsets. I have some struggles with exporting, got some GLBs from Tiltbrush and even minted them, and could take from VR Sculpt some objects, but not great. Yeah, so, when you're dealing with just the Quest 2, you're going to be very limited in what you can do. It's probably, you're only going to have access to like 20% of the sculpting applications out there. I've had a lot of issues with Tiltbrush, to the point where I almost don't use it. Well, I don't use it anymore because it's almost impossible. Or it's like when you import Tiltbrush into 3ds Max, it doesn't get the vertex color, and you have to create a shader and a material that's going to extract the vertex colors. Now, if you open it in Blender, assuming it's not beyond a certain size, it generally works, and then you basically say, okay, Blender, open up this FBX. Here's a vertex material. Now I have my vertex color. Now export that as another FBX to 3ds Max, and normally it follows. Whereas if you just open it in 3ds Max, it doesn't. So I don't know. There's something wrong with it, and for that reason, I stopped working with Tiltbrush. Not only that, it's not volumetric, so unfortunately, Medium is kind of like my favorite, and does require a powerful computer. Which is obviously expensive, so that's limiting to a lot of people. But yeah, it's like we're a little bit in the Wild West, right? So a lot of stuff doesn't work. A lot of stuff is like it's probably only 10 to 20% of my time is spent VR sculpting. The rest is extremely boring stuff with light baking, with dealing with exports, with dealing with workflows. And for that reason, I probably have like 30, 40, 50 pieces of VR that are made, but I'm not going to take like my entire weekend processing them. So you're only seeing a little bit of what I actually have, because it's such a pain to process them. So, forums will definitely be your friends, but I do have to warn you that, especially if you're just using the Oculus Quest, you'll be very limited to what you can do. And you're probably going to spend a lot of times in forums complaining that where's my vertex colors? Or like, I remember when you bring in the vertex colors in 3ds Max and it's all messed up. It's like, what's going on here? Yeah, you said maybe I'll use Quest to just have fun and being inside there for a couple of years. Definitely, like I said, consuming VR art is a huge part of the evolution of this, right? It's like, think about it like the invention of photography, the invention of video. Like, look at the early photos. Nobody knew what they were doing, and we're in that kind of awkward discovery phase. And thankfully, it's easier to transmit VR experiences than it was to transmit like photos in whatever the 40s or 30s or 20s. Okay, Creevy says, do you have any recommendations for non-mobile devices for 3D scans or photogrammetry? How hard is it to learn to optimize the model for importing? So the best for photogrammetry is going to be, in my opinion, is going to be the software called Reality Capture. And let me see here if I can find something real quick. Okay. So Reality Capture has a model
Hello,
of...
everyone. Today I will be showing you how...
Reality Capture has a model of... It used to be you paid for the software, but now they have a new model where the software is free and you can process an unlimited amount of geometry, but you have to pay to export that geometry. So it's actually fantastic for students, right? Because you can try it 1,000 times and it won't cost you a thing. And then when you're like, okay, now it's ready, I'm going to export it, it's going to cost you a couple bucks. With that being said, let me just share my screen. There's kind of like the wizard of photogrammetry. What is it? His name is Azad Balabanyan. Hopefully I'm saying that right. And he has this great video called Using Reality Capture PPI for Cheap. And PPI, I think, means like pay per instance or whatever. And let me just look at his, 1 second. He's got the thumbnail here. So normally, let's say that model would have cost like $8 to export. He's got a couple extra tricks where through changing a couple things manually and using some lower quality images of the same images, he's able to bring that down to 50 cents. So he's an amazing resource for anything related to photogrammetry. And he has some very interesting projects as well, where, for example, he'll use public sourced images to recreate like temples in different countries that are being torn down by war and stuff like that. So definitely, if you're interested in reality capture, like capturing reality is the right software to use. You can use videos from drones, you can use videos from your cell phones, you can use videos from your DSLRs. There's thousands of tutorials. Like if you just Google, photogrammetry best practices or tutorials, etc. And like, if you don't care about I don't really care about the photogrammetry being clean, right? So it simplifies things for me. It's kind of like each medium has their language. Painting is going to crack in a certain way. Sculpture is going to crack in a certain way. Argile is going to be different than stone, is going to be different than metal. And so the imperfections of photogrammetry can be part of that. And so, yes, there's going to be a whole market for perfect photogrammetry, but don't let that limit you, especially people with less means. Like, imperfect photogrammetry is completely fine. The fashion projects I did in VR and AR, like, they're dirty photogrammetry, and that's fine. It's not like I'm doing a project for Nike. I'm doing a project for like DIY punk fashion labels that don't care about the imperfections of photogrammetry. So don't, I could have spent like 90% of my project just making the perfect geometry, but I don't care about it. So don't limit yourself to perfect geometry, basically. But yeah, reality capture, watch Azad, read a couple tutorials. I recommend that you get a tripod. if you're going to be doing photogrammetry. The best is with a tripod and DSLR, but you can also just have your phone and, you know, or drone and just video stuff or take photos, and you'll be fine as well. It'll just have a couple more imperfections, but like I said, that's part of the medium's language in a way. Any other questions?
Hi. Hey, Sam. Thank you. It was really great. Yeah, it was some really good things to think about. And there's one kind of specific question that I have. So you brought up the hands, or like kind of the avatar, like how do you identify the viewer?
Mm-hmm.
I'm just curious. I'm working on a photogrammetry project, and I just assumed I wouldn't have hands or anything, or any sort of like a digital avatar for the viewer. And I'm working with a friend, and he was like, "Oh, what sorts of hands are you going to have?" And I was like, "Is that weird?" I'm curious what your thoughts are on, yeah, I guess in maybe like inside of a photogrammetry type of project that's less gamey and more, I guess, more of like a world that you're designing. Would you include, what are your thoughts in including hands or sort of like, yeah, I guess avatar identifiers for the viewer?
So in a gallery setting where somebody will just visit for like 3 minutes and it's their first time in VR, I really try to have no controllers, because then it becomes a question of, oh, how do I, you know, like they're going to be holding it wrong. And then they're going to be like, oh, it becomes like 2 out of those 3 minutes becomes how to hold the controller. So I really like just put on the headset, walk around. It removes a lot of the friction. And you know what I hate with controllers is like they'll press the start button and then they're just staring, and then they're like, after 2 minutes, they're like, yeah, I see a menu. It says like zombie game, you know, and you're like, oh, you pressed start by accident. So it can really ruin a gallery show quite quickly and easily. And sometimes the hands don't add any value to the project. If you are going to, okay, let's skip beyond that. In the future, very quickly, what we're seeing with the Quest is that we'll have hand tracking that does not require a controller. So is it there? It's there in beta right now, I think. Do you need to be a programmer? Maybe a little bit. So, you know, if you're able to go through that where people just go like this and they don't have to go, you know, like this, then that's very nice. It removes a lot of friction, but it's a lot of work. Maybe I'm just lazy in that sense, and that I focus on what I'm good at, which is the architecture and the sculpture and that kind of immersive. And I'm just like, there's no body, I don't care. If it was just a plug and play and there were nice hands, I would probably enable them, especially if it was just hand tracking through the cameras. And the thing is, like, you know, when you're looking at an Unreal template model or a Unity template model, you're going to have these very default hands. Like you're going to have the Facebook blue hands, or you're going to have the Unreal like robot hands. And like the last thing you want to see in a high-end art project is like the tutorial robot hands from the Unreal template. And then let's say you were to scan some hands. Well, are the fingers going to move, or are they just like these floating hands? That may make people even more uncomfortable than not having hands. It's like people have pretty high expectations in VR. You know, in the game like Alex, Half-Life Alex, it's like, okay, if you put a bottle there, people are going to expect to be able to pick up the bottle and smash it and like move the liquids around and stuff like that. So if you're going to provide something to people, their expectations may be pretty high for them. And so you have to kind of decide, do I want to go all the way? Do I want to go halfway? Do I want to go minimum? Or do I want to just not even deal with it at all? The other thing too is with VR, sometimes people try to make it into a game, or they're try to make it all complicated and reactive and have gaming elements to it, and that can quickly ruin the art. And then it becomes, it's not a good game and it's not a good piece of art. Like I remember there was this one artist who spent like an entire year in his PhD making like a gamified VR thing, and it was very much that. It was like, this is a terrible game, and it's also a terrible piece of art. So you're like, you didn't do either one, and so it's easier to like just like what I try to say to my artists when I curate is like, I don't want you to make this a game. I just want you to go beyond painting and beyond sculpture. Like we're doing this transition where you couldn't create a world before. Like my main ask is I want to be in your painting, and that was impossible before. So don't try to like say, oh, and when you press your nose, the sun's going to explode, and when you do that, like there's going to be a little goblin telling you a story, and then when you wave your hands like this, there's going to be a sunset. It's like, I just want to be in your painting, and that'll be more than enough, or else it becomes like 80% of the effort. It becomes programming and gamified, and it ruins both aspects of things. Now, if you have a team of 10 people, or you're really a pro developer, go for it. If that's what you want to be, go for it. And same thing, right? Like, let's say somebody's really good at making avatars in games. Well, they can do that service not only for themselves, but offer it to other artists who are just artists who don't want to be developers, etc.
Mm-hmm. Can I ask you, how do the quest hands work?
I think it's all beta. I haven't really been used, to be honest. Developing for Quest is a major pain.
Yeah.
Everything's got to be optimized. Or like when I'm developing for desktop, I'm in Unity and I press play and I put on the headset and it works. When I'm developing for Quest, I'm in Unity and then I press push to Quest, and it's going to take 3 to 5 minutes, and then I can put on the Quest, and then the screen is black, and then I'm like, I don't know why the screen is black. What's going on? So it's a lot more friction. Like if you're going to be developing for the Quest, assume probably 2 to 5 times more development time. And lost hair. So I would say, like, unless you have a lot of resources, unfortunately, start to develop for the Rift or a desktop-based VR headset, and then go to the Quest or another headset. Then you may be like, oh Jesus, like this is way too complicated. Like, and I know, of course, developing for the Quest makes it a lot more democratic, but unless you have a team of developers and like, because I worked in architecture, I'm kind of a pro in optimizing and lighting and performance, and that's its own dark science to itself. So if you don't want to fall into that rabbit hole, you're going to be a lot more liberated by doing stuff that's connected to a powerful computer, even if it means less people can experience it. So start with that and then do the equivalent on Quest, and you may just realize that it's not even possible to do on Quest. And if you do stuff on Quest, you really have to lower your expectations a lot. Like, I found it so limiting. It's like you're going to be limited to maybe 50,000, 100,000 triangles, very little animation, just a lot of limits. Like, think video games in the 2000s. Think like GTA 2 type video games,
Well, thank you.
My pleasure. Anybody else got a question, a direction, or comments? All right. Well, I think we went through a lot of stuff. It was great also to be able to answer more specific questions that you had. So if there's no more questions and comments, maybe this is a good time to end it. Matilda, go ahead.
Will you share the presentation?
The presentation is recorded. I'm not sure it'll be up to crypto to decide when they release it, and how they release it. Like, I don't know if they'll release it internally before they put it on the YouTube, because I think it took almost a year for my presentations to be released on YouTube. So I'm not sure when the schedule will be exactly.
That goes a lot faster now, I think.
Yeah, we usually upload the video the same day.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Yes.
Perfect. Things have changed.
I was more wondering in terms of the slides, if you could share those as a reference.
The websites?
The slides.
Oh, the slides. Yeah, I can put that up for sure. It's old.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Sam. It was great. Thank you.
And what I'll do is I'll put a tweet of experiences that I recommend consuming. Most of them are on desktop VR, fortunately, but those are like some mind-altering experiences that really kind of get you thinking about like what could art in VR be, rather than like, oh, it's just a movie, but in VR, etc. So hopefully that gives you a good intro, and I'll share that into the Discord as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Sam. Have a nice day.
My
Bye.
pleasure. Have a great weekend, folks.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks so much.
Cheers.
Thank you so much. See ya.